Well, it's wonderful to be back at Emirates Old Trafford in person, the home of Lancashire cricket and the home of the Stadium Business Summit, our annual meeting of bringing the global venue, stadium, arena industry together. Lungi, it's been your first time with us. Just some impressions on the summit and bringing this community together.
Thanks, Ian. I think firstly, it's probably pertinent to thank you as the Stadium Business Summit and your team in terms of delivering the event, but thanking Lancashire Cricket Ground as well for hosting us. We've been hosted really well over the last couple of days. It is my first time here and I found it really interesting. It's the first in-person event I've attended since the pandemic. It's been interesting to see how we've operated, obviously, without the restrictions, but haven't necessarily felt safe because we're using, obviously, technology that's out there in terms of informing other people how we want to be treated, basically, and how we want to go forward within...
With the wristbands.
Exactly, within the arena. So I've got an orange one, which is just the fist bump, which suits me fine. And that's been really handy. I think the vendors you've had have been really... really pertinent. They've been really relevant in terms of everything we're going through. The speakers you've had have also been relevant, and obviously key themes that are coming out are around sustainability, are around supporter engagement, customer experience at our venues, investments in terms of venues, and obviously key importance being ROI. I think what's quite clear from the last couple of days is that the bottom line is still very, very important. I think the innovation around the silent disco headphones has been brilliant, and I think and hopefully no speakers sort of took any offence to having empty stage areas, because people are obviously all over the building, actually still being able to listen in and being able to switch between two stages without actually physically moving, I think has been really key, and it's meant that you can continue obviously being in touch with the office whilst you're also still listening to everything that's going on in and around the conference. So no, it's been brilliant.
Thank you. I think, yeah, the disco headphones, the trade-off is the audience gains the knowledge, but the speaker doesn't necessarily gain the feedback. It's a bit like playing to a darkened room and you're not sure whether the crowd are enjoying themselves, but giving the guests the opportunity to choose where they sit, how they move around. I think, is that a model going forward for events, Daniel? Being flexible, having space?
Without doubt, being involved in live events for so long, Ian, it's been great to have people back together again in person for the first time in a couple of years. And, you know, here at Emirates Old Trafford, we pride ourselves on our live events and having customers, whether they be in conference events like today, or whether it be live sport or live concerts with 50,000 people. And I think it's great that as an industry we're starting to feel our way back there. I think the innovation, as you said, I think is really important. I think one of the big things for me is the blending of the digital and live experience going forward. And I think that, in a microcosm of what we saw today with the way you handled the stages and the silent disco headphones, was a great innovation. But it's how you've been running this event a long time, but how you've constantly looked to innovate. And rather than just preaching or telling or getting other people to tell venues what to do, you've actually done that yourself in terms of how you've presented the summit and the changes you've made over the years, listening to feedback. And I think from a digital and live perspective, it is really hard to get that right, and particularly when you look at, you know, virtual, Zoom, hybrids. Actually, the way you did it and the way you arranged it this year with those headphones really did give you a chance to blend that digital and live experience. So as Lungi says, is that, you know, you actually could listen to a key presentation, but also be checking out the exhibition as well. And I think that's something that it kind of puts the choice back in the customer's hands, and I think it was really excellent.
Thank you. I think with hindsight, given another change on restrictions and travel conditions, you know, a hybrid feed out of the building might have been another option, and one we'll add. But certainly off the back of hosting the event 2020 entirely virtually as a broadcast globally, it's a very different audience and a very different feeling. We actually had no feedback at all on the event in person. Today we've had hugs and handshakes and fist bumps and great feedback forms, but when you deliver remotely, the personal touch is not there. Mask wearing is clearly one of those factors in that, how comfortable are people without masks? But the restrictions are not there currently, and we're thankful for that people, I was surprised, people are very happy to be vaccinated and be back in person. The faith in the vaccines is there, and boosters, and that's given people a level of comfort that probably a year ago was not there.
Absolutely.
Are you seeing that with the crowds coming in? You host bigger audiences than
we are, and I think the data is now obviously a lot more filled in. There's a lot more knowledge just around the effects of the virus. We've obviously had a new variant come to us in the last 7 days or whatever it is, and that's obviously dealing with the unknown again, which we've been doing for the last 24 months. But actually seeing more and more people come back into grounds has been great, and actually they'd rather not have those restrictions. And at the moment we're not sure how many are vaccinated because we haven't asked. We've had to report on the data around our players. We've asked our staff on a voluntary basis in terms of what that looks like in terms of the people we're working with, whether it's internal stakeholders as staff and players or supporters. So we actually don't know status of our supporters. Now, if that obviously comes in terms of a restriction, that's obviously going to be very, very challenging in terms of dealing with it. And I think there's a lack of clear sort of guidance, first of all, especially in England, around the COVID passports, but also a lack of tech in terms of managing that appropriately. Obviously, at the moment, you can use your COVID passports for travelling, and it's in your Apple Wallet. We've just gone completely digital in terms of our ticketing. So our supporters, when they come to the venue, have a ticket on whether it's their Apple Wallet or their Google Wallet or whatever it's called. If you then add the COVID passport onto that, for people who might be older and maybe aren't used to having to deal with that, to then produce multiple sort of digital tickets is, I think, going to be a challenge in terms of managing that from a resource perspective in terms of our turnstiles, and actually having stewards checking every single person, because this is the other thing, if they do come in, those COVID passports, it will have to be checking everybody rather than just a handful. I think though, having spoken to some vendors at the summit the last 2 days, other parts of the continent are working on that and actually have solutions in terms of having apps that provide you with that single digital ticket that will basically check your ticket in terms of access control and your digital passport as well for COVID. But I think it has been interesting to see people actually without any masks, and I got an Uber here, jumped out of the Uber with my mask on, went into the venue with my mask on, but I was the only one with my mask on. So I think it's great that people have that level of comfort in the vaccine, and that is, as I said earlier, around the data that we've got available in terms of how COVID affects you when you have got the vaccine. But again, we're still trying to figure out what Omicron is going to chuck at us next.
No, agreed. I think this is the path venues have been navigating for the last 2 years, isn't it, Daniel? You managed to play games behind closed doors. You had the hygiene bubble, and I think we're now all in a rush to get fans back. We want fans back in the venue, but we want to give them reassurance that it's safe to do so. That has to come from the government, but also from the venue operator, surely.
Yeah, I think it's been a very challenging year for anybody, any professional sports team and sports club. And obviously, we hosted international cricket behind closed doors, one of only 2 venues to do so in 2020. And very, very challenging, to kind of maintain that level of biosecurity was really, really difficult. And the consequences of a breach where a player testing positive, putting the entire broadcast contract for the whole of cricket at risk, no pressure. I think where we're at now, though, is I think you have to follow the science. But I think one of the things that if I was talking to the government today, it would be, you've done a brilliant job on the vaccine programme. I mean, I don't think anybody can argue with that compared to a number of other countries. The rollout of the boosters, they've absolutely bet the house on the rollout programme. I think, I think one of the challenges, if I look back at it, is business needs certainty. Businesses need to plan. They need to be able to focus on what's next. So I think it's harder when you're talking to government about getting them to understand that certainty piece. And actually, and actually giving you that confidence that you can plan. I think one of the big issues with 2020 was, yes, we're going to be okay. Then we weren't okay. Then full 6-month lockdown. Then limited restrictions. Then restrictions went from 5,000 to full house in 3 days. And trying to mobilise from 5,000 capacity to 23,000 capacity in 3 days puts a massive pressure on the events team and the venue team. And that's something that, the government go, well, look, it's not really my problem. I can't really help that. That's just the way we are. But I think if we could get the government to actually look at and go, do you know what? We need to understand and take into account the fact that businesses need to plan, make our lives a lot easier.
Having some lead-in time, having some clarity, I think, on messages helps. We're talking about COVID and pandemic, and hopefully we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and coming out the other way. We're not sure what's going to happen in January, February. But beyond that, as venue operators, we've got these other issues on our agenda, sustainability being the biggest one facing the planet. And how do we embrace that within a venue? What are you doing at Birmingham City, Lungi?
I think the other key thing to note on sustainability is the lead we're getting from the government, and they've been talking and going to conferences for the best part of 20 years, talking about actually helping the environment, doing a lot more. It's obviously staring at us down the barrel now, and it's become a lot more of an urgent issue. I think the challenge venues have, I think the challenge that private businesses have, is that clarity around those targets, the dates, but actually the support we can get from the government in terms of infrastructure around the areas we're operating in, and then obviously coming into our venues and how we can actually go on the back of that and help the environment and help the sustainability issue. I also think a key thing around that is actually sports as an industry can probably lead on that. It leads on many things with regards to society, and I think this can also be one of those things. And we spoke earlier about how old our stadiums are, and St Andrews is certainly a very, very old stadium, and we're trying to utilise it more in terms of a day-to-day basis, so that actually we're getting more use out of it rather than it being wasted dead space. And in terms of what we're actually doing practically on the ground, we're doing some very, very basic things, because that's what we can do now without the additional investment that's obviously needed in terms of being truly sustainable. We're quite intentional about the people we're partnering with in terms of our catering partner who have just come on board this season, Elior, in terms of how they're operating, where they're sourcing their foods from, obviously minimising waste, but also how they're serving the end user in terms of our supporters or our corporate clients, and reducing waste in that aspect is really, really important. We've also obviously got the issue around energy, which has become pertinent certainly over the last couple of months, with a few energy companies obviously going bust, and those rates being raised quite exponentially, and actually finding that really difficult in terms of dealing with it, with the fluctuation around those energy rates. But partnering again with whether it's a broker or direct supplier, people who are on the right track in terms of sustainability. And we can talk about sustainability in terms of what Stadia are doing, which are obviously quite large venues, or on an individual basis in terms of paper straws or whatever it is, which isn't enough. It's those energy companies who can have probably a bigger impact, and actually us being intentional about who we choose to partner with is quite key for us. So those are some of the really, really basic things that we're doing. We are looking at the moment for an LED provider. Now LED notoriously uses obviously a lot more energy, but actually there's companies out there who are driving efficiencies in terms of the energy that's being used by LEDs, and we're asking for that in our RFPs and making sure that that is something that is at the top of the agenda. But also having changed probably about 4 years ago now to different sort of bulbs in terms of our floodlights, and the energy efficiencies around that is something we're trying to concentrate on whilst we don't have the capital to do more.
There are quick wins there for venues.
Absolutely.
It's very interesting seeing some of the smaller clubs and smaller teams signed up to the UN sustainability agenda, signing up, and on the basis that sport has a very strong role to play in terms of communicating that. What are you doing at Emirates Old Trafford on the sustainability journey? Because it's not a project, is it?
No, it isn't, Ian, and I think things have changed. I think as our younger audiences are getting a bit older, they're becoming a lot more vocal, and they're quite rightly calling out previous generations in terms of actions as a whole in society. And customers now, particularly in our conference event space, but also our younger customers in our sports space, are saying, well, what are you doing about that? And it's a very good question. And I think, coming back to Lungi's point, is stadiums have a lot of profile, and actually we've got a great role to play in society in terms of raising the awareness of the issues here. But also we need to lead. You know, we've just got consent for a new 100-bed extension on the hotel and new restaurant and member facilities and museum facilities. But actually, it would have been very difficult to get that consent if we hadn't have removed gas supply from the building. That's really quite challenging to do, both from a design and from an actual operating perspective. But it's something that we're committed to do. We've also got enough space on the roof to look at potential solar. Although, again, as Lungi said, you know, the government needs to support us in terms of subsidies to make this work, because the 30-year ROI, you know, that's a very, very long time in any business's business cycle. So I think there are things that we all can do. You know, eco doesn't mean cheap. I think people sometimes think that it will save you money. I think ultimately consumption reduction is the only thing that will save you money on utilities. But we do have a responsibility to future generations to get this right and to hit carbon neutral targets. And that's something that the stadiums, it's now in most boardrooms in the UK, ESG, environment, social, society and governance, is a very big issue. And certainly for us at Lancashire Cricket, ESG is a very, very important issue, and is something that is regularly on our high up our board and exec team agenda.
Maybe just a final point, we'll look at the fan experience, the fan journey. This is what it's all about at the end of the day, is a great experience for people who come to venues. Where do we start with that as we reopen? Because the focus has been on making our venues compatible, fit for purpose in terms of legislation and getting licenses to open, COVID safety, motivating a staff that and a team on the ground that probably hasn't worked for a few years. And then we're now trying to add the sort of Disney sparkle, the secret sauce, the essence on top of that. I mean, how much can we do with that starting? Is it really about getting the engine going first before you polish the experience?
I think for us at Birmingham City, we actually didn't get the opportunity to have the 2,000 or the 4,000 or whatever it was in terms of when crowds were starting to come back. So we actually didn't get to test an event with spectators in, and we were behind closed doors until we were able to let everybody in. And the
so
key
you
thing
went from zero to full house?
To full house, essentially, with the restrictions that we had on obviously the stands. But the key thing at that point was ensuring people's safety, how comfortable people were being in a venue and being next to each other. And the key bit for us on that was communication and actually speaking to them in terms of how different their journey is going to look at coming in through the gates and through the turnstiles into their seats, going onto the concourse, obviously, and making sure that they had as much information as possible with regards to the changes around how we were operating as a venue, the expectation to them, and how we were helping keep them safe. So that was the key thing to begin with. They're obviously bedded in now, and we've had them in since August. And obviously, bar everything that goes on the pitch, there's a whole match day experience that you've got to contend with. The other thing we're still contending with is the red zone, which is obviously the pitch area. So some of the things you might have done with regards to fan engagement on the pitch are very, very limited because we had to keep that area sterile for our supporters. But we're slowly bringing that back. What we have done this season is partner with a gaming company, and we've actually converted one of our lounges into their gaming company. I won't give them any free promo, but What that means is supporters are coming in earlier to basically use the facilities, which is obviously always key, and are sticking around longer as well, which is also key. But in terms of that customer journey and improving that, we're in the middle of developing an app. We are also in the middle of getting a new website, which is obviously key in terms of buying a ticket, obviously attending, any changes being communicated through those push notifications on the app, whether you're in Stadia or not, and being cashless. We've just gone through that transition as well, which has been easier post-pandemic, because obviously you go to restaurants, you go to pubs now, everything is digital. And actually we've seen our customers who, some are a little bit older, actually adapting really, really well to that. So hopefully that next stage in terms of the app, which is going to be really, really raising the engagement levels with our fans, should also be a seamless transition. And that is really around how we're engaging with them when maybe there isn't a game, but also how they're engaging with us. What it will allow us to do, which we're already making strides with, is getting to know them a lot more in terms of collecting their data. Insights are obviously valuable, and some organisations do that better than others. We are still getting to a point where we're actually collecting meaningful data that we can utilise to go back to your ROI, your sustainability, and those key things that we've been talking about the last 2 days.
And I mean, Lungi's got a big focus on the football experience. That's where you are. You're further along the sort of venue development journey in a way, because you've got the Cricket Foundation, you've got the new facilities. I think we're all envious of those, aren't we? And you're now on that point of, I've got customers coming for 12, 15 different reasons. They're conferences, they're concert goers, they're cricket lovers, but they might be doing something else here, an Asian wedding or whatever, but you're getting all these touch points for a different range of customers. Is that your challenge going forward, to pull that together?
Yeah, very much. I mean, just quickly on Lungi's point also is, you know, when we had social distancing, that's very, very hard to put magic on social distancing, very difficult. In the live event scenario, I think without social distancing, I think if I look at Emirates, our principal partner, they do this really well, and a lot of it is down to precise and very clear advanced event information and communication. And actually, once you get that advanced communication around, you can't check in without a negative PCR test, effectively all of the things they do on the plane in terms of the HEPA filters and the 98% filtration, and the way that the staff are PPE'd up, it then means that they can really focus on the service, because they've communicated the safety elements in advance that give you that comfort. The
expectation level is there from the outset.
Yeah, but it means that they can nail the service, whereas you're not worried about delivering the safety on the day, because you've communicated in advance exactly what that environment's going to be like. And I think that's really very important. And Emirates is somebody I think does it really well, and we can learn a lot from that as a venue. I think in terms of your second question, yes, we've got potentially 15 different data points from, you know, we have more varied revenue streams than any other cricket club in the country, which is great. But on the other hand, it makes it very difficult to track loyalty in terms of we've got people who spend money across multiple areas. And we're working with PTI Digital at the moment to sponsor a Stadium Business Summit, and, you know, looking at how we actually start to consolidate those data inputs to make it easier to get that single customer view, which is, you know, a lot of people talk about that, but it's really kind of a holy grail in the kind of venue space. Nobody really does it that well across those number of channels, and it's something that is very much a priority for us, is to get to know our customer better. Data is everything now. In the old days of naming rights, it was about a name on the stand, it was about hospitality, it was about a few other benefits, player appearances. Now it's all about data. You know, with Emirates, it's about what's the propensity of your fans and customers to want to spend money on flights out of Manchester. And that's very interesting you telling me that, but prove that. And that it's very different questions 10, 15 years on from when I first got involved in naming rights to what the expectations of those organisations are now.
Right. And after all this, do you still love the venue business?
Yeah, I think it has so much versatility in terms of its use And I think it's like no other workplace, isn't it? I've worked in stadium now for just under a decade, and it doesn't compare in terms of that wow factor. But we are working on bringing that back for our supporters, with limited finances, but also with a challenging area really in terms of the concentration around the footprint around the stadium, transport and accessibility. It's still a great business, but I think there's still a lot of work to do really.
Daniel, still enjoying the stadium business
Yeah, I've been in
in
it
the broadest sense?
over 15 years, I think. Do you know what? Stadiums are the cathedrals of sport. It's an overused term, but
Yeah.
people come to worship their teams, and that's what they do. But I think over the time, customers in society have become so used to immediate service, immediate products, and immediate innovation. And I think stadium industry has been a bit slow to kind of grasp that. I think technology and a focus on the customer is definitely the primary should be the primary focus of any stadium going forward into the next century. And I think it's so exciting. You know, I'm very fortunate to work in sport and in a stadium environment, and I think it gives you a variety every day where your customers and your fans and your members constantly challenge you in a new way to say, yeah, that's all great, but what about this? What about that? And I think it keeps us fresh and dynamic. So no, I think working in stadiums is brilliant.